Welcome and thank you for stopping by Sheila's Audiobooks, and I am Sheila. This recording is coming from South Texas. All story recordings are in the public domain per United States copyright law. This story was first published January 1, 1955. Tal Howard has returns home from a Korean prisoner of war camp. He can't help feeling that something's missing. Desperate for a thrill as much as a big payday, Tal heads for the sleepy village in upstate New York where a dying pal once assured him buried treasure awaits. If Tal can find the girl who can lead him to it, another stranger is in town. Earl Fitzmartin, a cold, mysterious loner who terrorized him and the other POWs. Now this psychopath is watching Tal's every move and waiting to strike. A bullet for Cinderella Part 2. Welcome and thank you for stopping by Sheila's Audiobooks, and I am Sheila. This recording is coming from South Texas. All story recordings are in the public domain per United States copyright law. This story was first published January 1, 1955. Tal Howard has returns home from a Korean prisoner of war camp. He can't help feeling that something's missing. Desperate for a thrill as much as a big payday, Tal heads for the sleepy village in upstate New York where a dying pal once assured him buried treasure awaits. If Tal can find the girl who can lead him to it, another stranger is in town. Earl Fitzmartin, a cold, mysterious loner who terrorized him and the other POWs. Now this psychopath is watching Tal's every move and waiting to strike. A bullet for Cinderella Part 2. He had talked about it when we were first imprisoned. I'd forgotten about it until that moment. I remembered Timmy saying that it was on a small lake, a rustic cabin their father had built. He and George had gone there to fish, many times. He mentioned it, I said. I heard about it after I got here. It seemed like a good place. So I went up there with my little shovel. No dice, Tal. I dug up most of the lake shore. I dug 100 holes. See how nice I am to you? That's one more place where it isn't. Later on George let me use it for a while before he sold it. It's nice up there. You'd like it. But it's clean. Thanks for the information. I'm keeping an eye on you, Tal. I'm interested in your progress. I'll keep in touch. You do that. Blackman runs east of Delaware. It starts 3 blocks north of here. Butternut must be about 14 blocks over. It's not hard to find. Thanks. I turned on my heel and left him. It was dusk when I headed out Blackman. I found Butternut without difficulty. I found the blue house and parked in front. As I went up the walk toward the front door, the first light went on inside the house. I pushed the bell and she opened the door and looked out at me, the light behind her, child in her arms. Mrs. Rorick. I'm Mrs. Rorick, she said. Her voice was soft and warm and pleasant. You were Cindy Kirshner then. I was a friend of Timmy Warden in prison camp. She hesitated for a moment and then said, won't you come in a minute? When I was inside and she had turned toward the light, I could see her better. The teeth had been fixed. Her face was fuller. She was still a colorless woman with heavy glasses, but now there was a pride about her, a confidence that had been lacking in the picture I had seen. Another child sat on a small tricycle and gave me a wide-eyed stare. Both children looked very much like her. Mrs. Rorick did not ask me to sit down. How well did you know Timmy, Mrs. Rorick? I don't think he ever knew I was alive. In camp, before he died, he mentioned a Cindy. Could you have been the one? I certainly doubt that. It confused me. I said, when I mentioned him you asked me to come in. I thought. She smiled. I guess I'll have to tell you. I had the most fantastic and awful crush on him. For years and years. It was pathetic. Whenever we were in the same class, I used to stare at him all the time. I wrote letters to him and tore them up. I sent him unsigned cards at Easter and Valentine's Day and Christmas and on his birthday. I knew when his birthday was because once a girl I knew went to a party at his house. It was really awful. It gave me a lot of miserable years. Now it seems funny. But it wasn't funny then. It started in the 6th or 7th grade. He was 2 grades ahead. It lasted until he graduated from high school. He had a red knit cap he wore in winter. I stole it from the cloakroom. I slept with it under my pillow for months and months. Isn't that ridiculous? She was very pleasant. I smiled back at her. You got over it? Oh, yes. At last. And then I met Pat. I'm sorry about Timmy. That was a terrible thing. No, if he mentioned any Cindy, it wasn't me. Maybe he would know me by sight. But I don't think he'd know my name. Could he have meant some other Cindy? It would have to be some other Cindy. But I can't think who. There was a girl named Cindy Waskowitz, but it couldn't have been her, either. She's dead now. Can you think of who it could be? She frowned and shook her head slowly. No, I can't. There's something in the back of my mind, though. From a long time ago. Something I heard, or saw. I don't know. I shouldn't even try to guess. It's so vague. No, I can't help you. But the name Cindy means something? For a moment I thought it did. It's gone now. I'm sorry. If you remember, could you get in touch with me? She smiled broadly. You haven't told me who you are. I'm sorry. My name is Howard. Tal Howard. I'm staying at the Sunset Motel. You could leave a message there for me. Why are you so interested in finding this Cindy? I could at least be consistent. I'm writing a book. I need all the information about Timmy that I can get. Put in the book that he was kind. Put that in. In what way, Mrs. Rorick? She shifted uneasily. I used to have dreadful buck teeth. My people could never afford to have them fixed. One day, that's when I was in John L. Davis School, that's the grade school where Timmy went to, and it was before they built the junior high. I was in the 6th grade and Timmy was in the 8th. A boy came with some funny teeth that stuck way out like mine. He put them in his mouth in assembly and he was making faces at me. I was trying not to cry. A lot of them were laughing. Timmy took the teeth away from the boy and dropped them on the floor and smashed them under his heel. I never forgot that. I started working while I was in high school and saving money. I had enough after I was out to go to get my teeth straightened. But it was too late to straighten them then. So I had them taken out. I wanted marriage and I wanted children, and the way I was no man would even take me out. She straightened her shoulders a little. I guess it worked, she said. I guess it did. So put that in the book. It belongs in the book. I will. And if I can remember that other, I'll phone you, Mr. Howard. I thanked her and left. I drove back toward the center of town. I began to think of Fitz again. Ruth was right when she used the word creepy. But it was more than that. You sensed that Fitz was a man who would not be restrained by the things that restrain the rest of us. He had proved in the camp that he didn't give a damn what people thought of him. He depended on himself to an almost psychopathic extent. It made you feel helpless in trying to deal with him. You could think of no appeal that would work. He couldn't be scared or reasoned with. He was as primitive and functional as the design of an axe. He could not even be anticipated, because his logic was not of normal pattern. And then, too, there was the startling physical strength. In camp I had seen several minor exhibitions of that power, but only one that showed the true extent of it. Those of us who saw it talked about it a long time. The guards who saw it treated Fitz with uneasy respect after that. One of the supply trucks became mired inside the compound, rear duals down to the hubs. They broke a tow line trying to snake it out. Then they rounded up a bunch of us to unload the supply truck. The cases aboard had obviously been loaded on with a winch. We got all the stuff off except one big wooden packing case. We never did learn what was in it. We only knew it was heavy. We were trying to get a crude dolly under it, but when we tilted it, we couldn't get the dolly far enough back. Every guard was yelling incomprehensible orders. I imagine Fitz lost patience. He jumped up into the bed of the truck, put his back against the case, squatted and got his fingers under the edge. Then he came up with it, his face a mask of effort, cords standing out on his throat. He lifted it high enough so the dolly could be put under it. He lowered it again and jumped down off the truck, oddly pale and perspiring heavily. Once it was rolled to the tailgate on the dolly, enough men could get hold of it to ease it down. When it was on the ground, one of the biggest of the guards swaggered up, grinning at his friends, and tried to do what Fitz had done. He couldn't budge it. He and one of his friends got it up a few inches, but not as high as Fitz had. They were humiliated and they took it out on the rest of us, but not on Fitz. He was left alone. Back in town, I decided I would have a drink at the inn and a solitary meal and try to think of what the next step should be. I was picked up in front of the inn, 10 steps from my car. Chapter 5. There were 2 of them. One was a thin, sandy man in uniform and the other was a massive middle-aged man in a grey suit with a pouched, florid face. Your name Howard? Yes, it is. Police. Come on along. What for? Lieutenant wants to talk to you. I went along. They put me in a police sedan and drove about 8 blocks and turned into an enclosed courtyard through a grey stone arch. Other cars were parked there. They took me through a door that was one of several opening onto the courtyard. We went up wide wooden stairs that were badly worn to the 2nd floor. It was an old building with an institutional smell of dust, carbolic, and urine. We went by open doors. One door opened onto a big file room with fluorescent lights and grey steel filing cases. Some men played cards in another room. I could hear the metallic gabbling voice of some sort of communication system. We turned into a small office where a thin, bald man sat behind a desk that faced the door. His face was young, with a swarthy Indian harshness about it, black brows. His hands were large. He looked tall. A small wooden sign on his desk said Det. Lieutenant Stephen D. Prine. The office had cracked buff plaster walls. Books and pamphlets were piled in disorder in a glass front bookcase. A smallish man with white hair and a red whiskey face sat half behind Lieutenant Prine, on the small gilded radiator in front of the single window. One of the men behind me gave me an unnecessary push that made me thump my knee against the front of the desk and almost lose my balance. Prine looked at me with complete coldness. "This is that Howard," one of the men behind me said. "Okay." The door behind me closed. I glanced back and saw that the man in uniform had left. The big man in the grey suit leaned against the closed door. "Empty your pockets onto the desk," Prine said. "Everything." "But." "Empty your pockets." There was no threat in the words. Cold, bored command. I put everything on the desk. Wallet, change, pen and pencil, notebook, cigarettes, lighter, penknife, folder of traveler's checks. Prine reached a big hand over and separated the items into 2 piles, notebook, wallet, and checks in one pile that he pulled toward him. "Put the rest of that stuff back in your pockets." "Could I ask why?" "Shut up." I stood in uncomfortable silence while he went through my wallet. He looked carefully at every card and piece of paper, at the photograph of Charlotte, at the reduced photostat of my discharge laminated in plastic. He went through the notebook and then examined the traveler's checks. "Now answer some questions." He opened a desk drawer, flipped a switch, and said, "April 20th, 7:10 p.m., interrogation by Lieutenant Prine of suspect picked up by Hillis and Brubaker in vicinity of Hillston Inn. What is your full name?" "Talbot Owen Howard." "Speak a little louder." "Age and place of birth?" 29. Bakersfield, California. "Home address?" "None at the present time." "What was your last address?" 18 Norwalk Road, San Diego. "Are you employed?" "No." "When were you last employed and by who?" "Up until 2.5 weeks ago. By the Guarantee Federated Insurance Company. I had a debit. Health and life. I was fired." "For what reason?" "I wasn't producing." "How long did you work for them?" 4 years altogether. 3.5 before the Korean War. The rest of it since I got back." "Are you married? Have you ever been married?" "No." "Parents living?" "No." "Brothers or sisters?" "One sister. Older than I am. She lives in Perth, Australia. She was a wave and she married an Aussie during the war." "Do you have any criminal record?" No. "You don't seem sure." "I don't know if you'd call it a criminal record. It was when I was in school. One of those student riots. Disturbing the peace and resisting an officer." "Were you booked and mugged and fingerprinted and found guilty?" Yes. I paid a fine and spent 3 days in jail. Then you have a criminal record. How long have you been in Hillston? I arrived here Wednesday night. 2 days. What is your local address? The Sunset Motel. On this vehicle registration, do you own the vehicle free and clear? Yes. You have a little over $1,000. Where did you get it? I earned it. I saved it. I'm getting a little sick of all this. It's beginning to make me sore. Why did you come to Hillston? Do I have to have a reason? Yes. You need a reason. I knew Timmy Warden in prison camp. And I knew others there that didn't come back. I'm going to write a book about them. There's my notes. You have them there. Why didn't you tell George Warden that? I didn't know how he'd take it. You didn't tell Fitzmartin, either? He has no reason to know my business. But you went out there to see him. And you were both in the same camp with Timmy Warden. It would seem natural to tell him. I don't care how it seems. I didn't tell him. If a man came to town with a cooked-up story about writing a book, it would give him a chance to nose around, wouldn't it? I guess it would. What else have you written? Nothing else. Are you familiar with the state laws and local ordinances covering private investigators? I stared at him blankly. No. Are you licensed in any state? No. I don't know what. If you were licensed, it would be necessary for you to find out whether this state has any reciprocal agreement. If so, you would merely have to make a courtesy call and announce your presence in this county and give the name of your employer. I don't know what you're talking about. Do you know a woman named Rose Fulton? No. I've never heard of her. Were you employed by Rose Fulton to come to Hillston? No. I told you I never heard of her. We were advised a month ago that Rose Fulton had hired an investigator to come here on an undercover assignment. We've been looking for the man. He would be the third one she's sent here. The first two made a botch of their job. There was no job here for them in the first place. Rose Fulton is a persistent and misguided woman. The case, if there was any case, was completely investigated by this department. Part of our job is to keep citizens of Hillston from being annoyed and persecuted by people who have no business here. Is that clear to you? I don't understand what you're talking about. I really don't. He looked at me for what seemed a long time. Then he said, "End of interrogation witnessed by Brubaker and Sparkman. Copies for file. Prine." He clicked the switch and closed the desk drawer. He leaned back in his chair and yawned, then pushed my wallet, checks, and notebook toward me. "It's just this, Howard. We get damn tired of characters nosing around here. The implication is that we didn't do our job. The hell we didn't. This Rose Fulton is the wife of the guy who ran off with George Warden's wife, Eloise." That name Fulton sounded familiar, but I didn't know why. It happened nearly 2 years ago. The first inquiry came from the company Fulton worked for. We did some hard work on it. Fulton was in town for 3 days. He was registered at the Hillston Inn. He stayed there every time he was in town. On the last night he was here, Friday night, he had dinner at the hotel with Eloise Warden. She waited in the lobby and he checked out. They got in his car. They drove to the Warden house. Eloise went in. Fulton waited out in the car. It was the evening of the 11th of April. A neighbor saw him waiting and saw her come out to the car with a big suitcase. They drove off. George Warden hadn't reported it to us. He knew what the score was when he got back to town and saw the things she'd taken. It was an open and shut situation. It happens all the time. But Rose Fulton can't bring herself to believe that her dear husband would take off with another woman. So she keeps sicking these investigators on us. You could be the third. I don't think so. No proof. Just a hunch. She thinks something happened to him here. We know nothing happened to him here. I've lost patience, so this time we're making it tough. You can go. If I happen to be wrong, if you happen to be hired by that crazy dame, you better keep right on going, friend. We've got a small force here, but we know our business." The big middle-aged man moved away from the door to let me out. There was no offer of a ride back to where they had picked me up. I walked. The walk wasn't long enough. By the time I got to the inn I was still sore at Prine and Company. I could grudgingly admit that maybe he thought he had cause to swing his weight around. But I didn't like being picked up like that, and it had irritated me to have to tell them I had no job, no permanent residence. I wasn't certain what legal right they had to take that sort of a statement from me. I had a drink at the dark bar at the end of the cocktail lounge at the inn. Business was light. I nursed my drink and wondered how they had picked me up so quickly. I guessed it was from the motel register. I'd had to write down the make of my car and the license number. They'd known who I'd talked to and what had been said. It was a small city and they acted like men who made a business of knowing what was going on. Just as I ordered the second drink, I saw a big man come in and stand at the other end of the bar. He looked like the man I had seen in the blue sedan. But I couldn't be certain. I had forgotten him and the effect he had had on Fitzmartin. He became aware of my interest. He turned and gave me a long look and turned back to the drink the bartender put in front of him. He had moved his head slowly when he turned to look at me. His eyes were in shadow. I had a sudden instinctive premonition of danger. Fitz was danger, but a known quantity. I did not know this man or where he fitted in. I did not want to attempt to ask him. He finished his drink quickly and left. I looked down into my drink and saw myself lying dead, sprawled, cold. It was a fantasy that had been with me in the prison camp and later. You think of your own death. You try to imagine how it will be, to just cease, abruptly, eternally. It is a chilling thought, and once you have started it, it is difficult to shake off. The depression stayed with me the rest of the evening. Thoughts of Ruth, of the new emphasis she had brought into my life, did little to relieve the blackness and the hint of fear. My mission in Hillston seemed pointless. It was part of running away from myself. There was no chance of finding the money, and even if there was and I did find it, I couldn't imagine it changing anything. Somehow I had become a misfit in my world, in my time. I had been jolted out of one comfortable rut, and there seemed to be no other place where I could fit. Other than Charlotte, and, too optimistically, Ruth, I could think of no one who gave a special damn whether I lived or died. After the light was out, I lay in darkness and surrendered myself to the great waves of bathos and self-pity. I wondered what would become of me. I wondered how soon I would be dead. I wondered how many other lonely beds there would be, and where they would be. Finally I fell asleep. Chapter 6. Saturday morning was dreary, with damp winds, low, scudding clouds, lights on in the stores. I couldn't get a better line on the Cooper girl until the administration office at the high school opened on Monday. The few leads had faded away into nothing. I wondered what I would do with the day. After buying some blades and some toothpaste, I drove around for a while and finally faced the fact that I was trying to think of a good excuse to see Ruth Stam. I went without an excuse. She was in the reception office at the animal hospital. She gave me a quick, warm smile as I walked in. A woman sat holding a small shivering dog, waiting her turn. There was a boy with a Siamese cat on a leash. The cat, dainty and arrogant, purposefully ignored the shivering dog. Ruth, smiling, asked in a low voice, "More questions?" "No questions. Just general depression." "Wrong kind of hospital, Tal. But the right kind of personnel. Need some kind of therapy?" "Something like that." She looked at her watch. "Come back at 12. We close at noon on Saturday. I'll feed you and we'll cook up something to do." The day was not as dreary when I drove away. I returned at 12. I went up to the house with her, and the three of us ate in the big kitchen. Dr. Buxton was a skilled storyteller. Apparently every misfortune that could happen to a veterinary had happened to him. He reviled his profession, and his own stupidity in getting into it in the first place. After a cigar he went off to make farm calls. I helped Ruth with a few dishes. "How about a plain old tour of the surrounding country?" she suggested. "There are parts that are very nice." "Then dinner tonight and a movie or something?" "Sold. It's Saturday night." She changed to slacks and a tweed jacket over a yellow sweater and we took my car. She gave me the directions. We took small back roads. It was pretty country, with rolling hills and spines of rock that stuck out of the hills. In the city the day had been gloomy. Out in the country it was no better, but the breeze seemed moist with spring. The new leaves were a pale green. She sat slouched in the seat with one knee up against the glove compartment and pointed out the farms, told me about the people, told me about the history of the area. At her suggestion I took a back road that led to a place called Highland Lake. She told me when to slow down. When we came to a dirt road we turned right. A mile down the slippery, muddy road was a sign that said B. Stam. I went cautiously down an overgrown drive through the woods until we came to a small cabin with a big porch overlooking a small lake less than a mile long and half as wide. I could see other cabins in the trees along the lake shore. We went onto the cabin porch and sat on the railing and smoked and talked and watched the quick winds furrow the lake surface. We don't get up here as much as we used to when Mother was alive. Dad talks about selling it, but I don't think he will. He hunts up here in the fall. It's only 18 miles from town, the shortest way. It's pretty primitive, but you know, Tal, this would be a good place to write. I felt again a quick, sharp pang of guilt. Her enthusiasm grew. Nobody is using it. There's no electricity, but there are oil lamps and a Coleman lantern. There's plenty of wood in the shed, and one of those little gasoline stoves. The bunks are comfortable and there's lots of blankets. It would save paying rent. I know Dad wouldn't mind a bit. Thanks, Ruth, but really I couldn't. Why not? It's only a half hour to town. I don't think I'll be here long enough to make it worthwhile moving in. Well, then, she said, okay. And I thought I detected some disappointment in her tone. I'd like you to see it, anyhow. The key was hidden on one of the roof supports near the door. We went inside. It was bare, but it looked clean and comfortable. There were fish rods on a wall rack, and a big stone fireplace. It's nice, I said. I've always loved it. I'd make a wild row if Dad ever tried to sell it. The first time I came up here they had to bring playpen and high chair. I learned to swim here. I broke my collarbone falling out of one of those top bunks in there. She smiled at me. We were standing quite close together. There was something both warm and wistful about her smile. There was a long silence in the room. I could hear birds and a far-off drone of an outboard motor. Our eyes locked once more and her smile faded as her mouth softened. There was a heaviness about her eyes, a look almost of drowsiness. We took a half step toward each other and she came neatly, graciously into my arms as though it were an act we had performed many times. The kiss was gentle at first and then fierce and hungry. As she strained upward against me my hands felt the long smoothness of her back, and her arm was crooked hard around my neck. We wavered in dizzy balance and I sidestepped quickly to catch our balance and we parted awkwardly, shy as children. Tal, she said. Tal, her voice was throaty and unfocused. I know, I said. I know. She turned away abruptly and walked slowly to the window and looked out across the lake. I followed her and put my hands lightly on her shoulders. I felt shamed by all this, shamed by my lies, and afraid of what would happen when she found out about me. I felt new tension in her body and she leaned closer to the window and seemed to peer more intently. What's the matter? Look. Isn't that some kind of animal over there? Directly across. That was the Warden camp before George sold it. The one with the green roof. Now look just to the right of the porch. I looked and saw something bulky, partially screened by brush. It looked as if it could be a bear. She brushed by me and came back with a pair of binoculars. She focused them and said, "It's a man. Here. You look." I adjusted them to my eyes. The man was getting to his feet. He was a big man in a brown suit. He was hatless and his hair was thin on top and he had a wide, hard-looking face. It was the man who had driven by Fitz and me in the blue sedan, the man who had come into the bar at the inn. He brushed the knees of his brown suit and dusted his hands together. He bent over and picked up what looked to be a long dowel or a piece of reinforcing rod. "Let me look," she said and took the binoculars again. "I know the people who bought the camp from George. That isn't the man. Maybe he's a serviceman of some kind." "I don't think so. I know most of them. Now he's going up on the porch. He's trying the door. Hey. He broke a window right next to the door. Now he's getting it up. Now he's stepping in over the sill." She turned to me, her eyes wide. "How about that? Tal, he's a thief. We better go over there." "Anything you say. But how about the law?" "Wait a minute." She hurried into the bedroom. She came back with a .22 target pistol and a box of shells. It was a long-barreled automatic. She thumbed the clip out and loaded it expertly, snapped the clip back in and handed me the gun. "You'll be more impressive with it than I would. Come on." There was no road that led directly around the lake. We had to go about 4 miles out of our way to get to the road on the other side of the lake. A dark blue sedan was parked at the head of the driveway, facing out. There wasn't room to drive by. I parked and we went down the trail toward the camp. I turned and motioned her to stay back. I went ahead but I heard her right behind me. The man came walking around the corner of the camp, frowning. He stopped short when he saw me, his eyes flicking toward the gun and then toward Ruth. "Why did you break into that camp?" Ruth demanded angrily. "Take it easy, lady. Put the gun away, friend." "Answer the question," I said, keeping the gun on him. He acted so unimpressed that I felt ridiculous holding the gun. "I'm a licensed private investigator, friend. Don't put any hole in me while I'm getting my wallet. I'll show you." He took the wallet out. He took out a card encased in plastic and nipped it toward us. Ruth picked it up. It had his picture and a thumbprint and two official-looking countersignatures, and it said he was licensed by the state of Illinois. His name was Milton D. Grassman. The card said he was 41 years old, 6'1", and weighed 205. "But what are you investigating?" Ruth asked. He smiled. "Just investigating." "And who are you, lady? Maybe you're trespassing." His smile was half good humor, half contempt. "You're working for Rose Fulton, aren't you?" I asked. The smile was gone instantly. He didn't seem to move or breathe. I had the impression that a very good mind behind that flat, tough face was working rapidly. "I'm afraid I don't know the name," he said. But he had waited too long. "Who are you, friend?" "We're going to report this to the police," Ruth said. "Go ahead, lady. Be a good citizen. Give them the word." "Come on, Tal," she said. We went back up the trail. When we got into the car I looked back and saw him standing by his car, watching us. He didn't take his eyes off us while he lit a cigarette and shook the match out. Ruth was oddly silent as I drove back toward the stamp camp. Finally I said, "What's the matter?" "I don't know. At first I thought you lied to me. Then I believed you. Now I don't know." "How come?" "You know what I'm thinking. You asked him about a Rose Fulton. It shocked him when you asked him that. Anybody could see that. Eloise Warden ran away with a man named Fulton. What would make you think to ask that Mr. Grassman that question?" She turned to face me. "What are you doing in Hillston, Tal? If that's your name." "I told you what I'm doing." "Why did you ask that man that question?" "The police picked me up last night. They had word that Rose Fulton had hired another man to come here. This will be the third. They thought I was that man. They interrogated me and then they let me go. So I guessed that maybe he was the man." We got out of the car. She was still looking at me oddly. "Tal, if you're here to write up Timmy, I think you would have told me that before now. It's a cute and interesting little story if you were here just to write up Timmy. And I can't believe that you could have forgotten it. I just didn't think of telling it." "That's no good, Tal." "I know it isn't. What's wrong? Is it something you can't tell me?" "Look, Ruth. There is another reason why I came. I lied to you. I don't want to tell you why I came here. I'd rather not. But it has something to do with Timmy." "That's right. He is dead, isn't he?" "He's dead." "But how can I know when you're lying and when you're not?" "I guess you can't," I said helplessly. She locked the camp and, on the way back, told me which turns to take. She had nothing else to say. I drove into her place. She opened the door quickly to get out. "Wait a minute, Ruth." Her right foot was on the ground. She sat on the corner of the seat and turned and looked back at me. "Yes? I'm sorry about this. You've made me feel like a fool. I talked a lot to you. I believed you and so I told you things I've never told anybody. Just to help you when you had no intention of writing up Timmy. I tell you, I'm sorry. That doesn't do very much good. But I'll give you this much benefit of the doubt, Tal. Look right at me and tell me that you have no reason to be ashamed of why you came here." I looked into the gray eyes and, like Grassman, I hesitated too long. She slammed the car door and went to the house without looking back. Saturday night was no longer a nice thing to think about. Somehow, through impulsiveness and through awkwardness, I had trapped myself. I felt as if I had lost a great deal more than a Saturday night date. She was not a girl you could lie to. She was not a girl you would want to lie to. My little cover story now seemed soiled and dingy. I drove into town. I started my drinking at the Hillston Inn. Before I left the inn I cashed 2 traveler's checks. I hit a great many bars. It was Saturday night. The city seemed alive. I can remember seeing the dwarf bartender. There was a woman I bought drinks for. At one time I was in a men's room and 4 of us were singing. The door was locked and somebody was pounding on it. We were making fine music. I was sick in a hedge and I couldn't find my car. I wandered a long time before I found it. I don't know what time it was. It was late. I had to keep one eye closed as I drove cautiously out to the motel. Otherwise the center line was double. I parked the car in front of my motel room and went, unwashed, to bed. Sunday was a replica, a sodden day in town, a drunken day. It was 11 when I got up on Monday morning. A half-dozen glasses of water made me feel bloated but didn't quench my thirst. My head pounded in a dull, ragged rhythm. I shaved slowly, painfully. The shower made me feel a little better. I decided that it was time to go. Time to leave this place. I didn't know where I would head for. Any place. Any kind of a job. Some kind of manual labor. Get too bushed to think. I packed my 2 bags. I left them inside the door and went out to unlock the trunk. All the transient cars were gone. A big dog stood with his feet against the side of my car, looking in the side window. The cold, thin, bird-like woman was carrying sheets and towels out of one of the other rooms and dumping them into a hamper on wheels. The dog jumped back as I walked out. He stood 20 feet away and whined in a funny way. I made as though to throw gravel at him and he went farther back. I didn't know what attracted him to my car. I happened to glance inside as I was heading to unlock the trunk. I stopped and looked for a long time. It seemed an effort to take my eyes away. A big body was on the floor in the back, legs bent, head tilted sideways. It was Milton Grassman. He still wore the brown suit. The knees showed traces of pale dried mud. The forehead, in the area where the thin hairline had started, was broken jelly, an ugly, sickening depression. No man could have lived more than a moment with a wound like that. I realized the woman was calling to me in her thin voice. I turned and said, "What?" I said, "Are you staying another day?" Yes, I'm staying another day." She went into another room. She was working her way toward mine. I hurried back in. I put one bag in the closet, opened the other one, put my toilet articles back in the bathroom. I slammed the door and went out. The dog was standing by the car again, whining. I got behind the wheel and drove out of there. I drove away from town. I didn't want to be stopped by a traffic light where anybody could look down into the back of the car. I remembered an old tarp in the back. I pulled off onto the shoulder and got the tarp. I waited while traffic went by and then spread the tarp over Grassman. I tried not to look at him while I did it. But I couldn't help seeing his face. The slackness of death had ironed everything out of it, all expression. I drove on aimlessly and then stormed again on the shoulder of the highway. I wanted to be able to think. I could feel the dreadful presence of the body behind me. My brain felt frozen, numbed, useless. It did no good to wonder when the body had been put there. I couldn't even remember the places where I had parked. Why had it been put in my car? Somebody wanted to get rid of it. Somebody wanted to divert suspicion from himself. From the look of the wound, murder had been violent and unplanned. One tremendous, skull-smashing blow. It was inevitable that I should begin to think of Fitz. Of the people I knew in Hillston, he was the one capable of murder, and both quick and brutal enough to have killed a man like Grassman. From what I had seen of him, Grassman looked tough and capable. But why would Fitz want to implicate me? The answer was quick and chilling. It meant that he had traced the right Cindy, the Cindy who would know where Timmy had buried the money. He might already have the money. The immediate problem was to get rid of the body. It should be a place where there would be no witness, no one to remember having seen my car. I couldn't go to the police. I was here before. Unemployed. No permanent address. A criminal record, according to your definition. It so happens I have a body in my car. It got in there somehow last night. Was I drunk? Brother, you can find a dozen witnesses to how drunk I was. I was a slobbering mess, the worst I've ever been in my life. Worse even than the night before. There would be no glimmer of understanding in the cold official eyes of Lieutenant Prine. A state road patrol car passed me, going slowly. The trooper behind the wheel stared curiously at me as I sat there. He stopped and backed up. Maybe they were already looking for me. He leaned across the empty seat and said, "What's the trouble?" "Nothing. I mean I was overheating." I thought I'd let it cool off. Is it far to a gas station? Mile or so. It'll cool off quicker if you open the hood. Will it? Thanks. And get it a little farther off the road, Doc. He went on. I moved the car farther off the road. I opened the hood. I wondered if he would be bothered by the way I had acted and come back to check my license and look the car over. I wondered if I should make a U-turn and get as far away from him as I could. But it made some sense to risk the outside chance of his coming back and stay right there until I could plan what to do with the body. The noon sun was warm. There was a subtle, sour odor in the car that sickened me. A dark red tractor moved back and forth across a distant hillside. Drainage water bubbled in the ditch beside the shoulder. A truck went by at high speed, the blast of its passage shaking my car. I found that a 2-day drunk gives your mind a flavor of unreliability. Memory is shaky and dreams become mixed with reality. I began to wonder if I had imagined the body. When there was no traffic, I looked into the back seat again. The tarp was there. The body was covered. It was not covered very well. I saw a thick ankle, a dark green sock, a brown scuffed shoe, cracked across the instep, with laces tied in a double knot, the way my mother used to tie my shoelaces when I was very small to keep them from coming untied. It made Grassman more believable as a person, as the person who had sat on the edge of a bed and tied those laces and then had gone out and become a body, and the laces would eventually be untied by somebody else, somebody with a professional coolness and an unthinking competence. I whirled around when I heard traffic coming. When the road was clear again, I pulled the tarp to cover the ankle and shoe, but it pulled clear of his head and my stomach spasmed and I could not look at him. After a while I fixed the tarp properly. I got out of the car. I did not want to look in again. But I found myself staring in at the side window. I had to get rid of it somewhere. I had to get rid of it soon. The very nearness of the body kept me from thinking clearly. The lake? I could find it again. But I could be seen there as readily as Ruth saw Grassman. I could hunt for obscure roads at random and dump the body out when I came to what seemed to be a good place. But the body was going to be found and it was going to be identified and it was going to be in the paper with the right name. And Ruth was going to remember the odd question I had asked the man and remember his telltale response to that question. The minutes were ticking by and I was getting nowhere. Fitzmartin's trap was wide and deep, lined with sharp stakes. I wished I could put the body back on his doorstep. Give it right back to him. Let him sweat. At first glance the idea seemed absurd. But the more I thought about it the better it seemed. I would be seen driving into the yard. But if questioned I could say that I was going to see Fitzmartin. And I would see Fitzmartin. I would leave the body in the yard somewhere between the piles of stacked lumber. No. That would do no good. No man would be so stupid as to kill another man and leave the body at the place where he worked. Yet if some attempt was made to conceal the body, perhaps then they would assume it was a temporary hiding place until Fitzmartin could think of another. On the other hand, would any man be so stupid as to kill another man and then drive the body to the police station in his car and claim he didn't do it? Maybe that was my best out. Maybe that was the best innocent reaction. My hands were icy cold and sweaty. They left wet marks where I touched the steering wheel. I was trying to think of every alternative, every possible plan of action. I could go back and check out and head west and try to leave the body where it would never be found. Buy a shovel. Dig a desert grave. I could put the body in the seat beside me and run into something. My ideas were getting worse instead of better. The very presence of the body made thinking as laborious as trying to run through waist-deep water. I did not want to panic, but I knew I had to get rid of it as soon as possible. And I could not see myself going to Prine for tender mercy. There had been a reason why Grassman had been killed. Hiding the body would give me a grace period. I would have to assume it would be traced to me eventually. By the time they caught up with me, I would have to know why he had been killed. Knowing why would mean knowing who. I knew it was Fitz. Why did Fitz kill Grassman? I shut the hood and started the car and drove. I was 5 miles from the court and about 9 miles from town when I found a promising-looking road that turned left. It was potholed asphalt, ravaged by winter, torn by tractor lugs. It climbed mild hills and dipped into forgotten valleys. It came out of a heavy wooded area, and ahead on the left, set well back from the road, I saw a tall stone chimney where a house had burned long ago. The weathered grey barn had half collapsed. It looked like a great grey animal with a broken back, its hind legs dragging. The road was empty. I turned in where the farm road had once been. Small trees bent over under my front bumper, dragged along the underside of the car, and half rose again behind me. I circled the foundation of the house and parked behind the barn near a wild tangle of berry bushes. I could not be seen from the road. I had to risk being seen from distant hillsides. It seemed very quiet with the motor off. A crow went over, hoarse and derisive. I opened the rear door of the car. I made myself grasp his heavy ankles. Rigor had begun to set in. It took all my strength to pull the bulky body free of the cramped space between the back seat and the back of the front seat. It came free suddenly, thudding to the ground. I released the ankles and staggered back. There had been something under the body. Friction had pulled it toward me. It rested on the car floor, half in and half out of the car, a short, bright length of galvanized pipe with a dark brown smear at one end. I left the body there and went to see where I would put it. There was a great splintered hole in the back of the barn. I stepped up and through the hole. The floor felt solid. Daylight came brightly through the holes in the roof. I went back to the body again. It was not hard to drag it to the hole, but getting it inside the barn was difficult. I had to lift it about 3 feet. I puzzled over how to do it. Finally I turned him around and propped him up in a sitting position, his back to the hole. I climbed up over him, then reached down and got his wrists. I pulled him up over the edge and then dragged him back into the darkness. There was some hay on the floor, musty and matted. I covered the body with it. I went out and got the piece of pipe, using a dry leaf to pick it up. I dropped it into the hay that covered the body. I went back out into the sunlight. I wondered about Grassman. I wondered what compulsion had made him choose his line of work. Dirty, monotonous, and sometimes dangerous work. From the look of the man as he talked to us up at the lake, I guessed that he had no idea it would end like this. He had looked tough and confident. This body under the straw was a far cry from the fictional private eyes, the smart ones and the suave ones and the Pisacan ones. His story had ended. He would not sit up, brush the straw out of his eyes and reach for either blonde or bottle. Leaving him there had about it the faint flavor of burial, as though solemn words should be said. I inspected the car. The floor rug was stained and spotted in 4 places. I couldn't see any on the seat, or on the insides of the doors. I took the floor rug out and rolled it up. I put it beside me in the front seat. I sat and listened to the quietness, straining to hear any sound of car motor laboring on the hills. I heard only the birds and the sound of wind. I drove back out and I did not head back the way I had come. A car seen going and returning was more likely to be remembered on a country road than a car that went on through. In about 3 miles I came to a crossroads. I turned north. I thought the road was paralleling the main highway, but in 5 miles it joined the main highway, coming into it at a shallow angle. I took the next secondary road that turned right. I was closer to the city. Soon, as I had hoped and expected, I came to a place where a lot of trash had been dumped. I put the rolled rug in with the bed springs and broken scooters and kicked some cans over it. By the time I passed the motel, heading toward the city, I was surprised to find that it was only 1:15. I ate at a small restaurant on Delaware Street. When I left I met Mrs. Pat Rorick on the sidewalk. She had an armful of bundles. She smiled and said, "Hello, Mr. Howard. Did you remember anything, Mrs. Rorick? I don't know if this is any use to you, but I did remember one little thing. It was a skit the 8th grade did and Timmy was in it. It was based on Cinderella. I can't remember the girl who played the part, but I remember how funny it sounded the way it was written, with Timmy calling the girl Cindy. It probably doesn't mean anything." "It might. Thanks. I'm glad I met you. I was wondering whether to call you about anything that sounds so stupid. I've got to run. There comes my bus. I'll drive you home." "No. Don't bother." I convinced her I had nothing to do. We got into the car. She had her packages piled on her lap. I wondered how she'd feel if she'd known about my last passenger. How should I go about finding out who that girl was? Gee, I don't know. It was a long time ago. I don't know if anybody would remember. The 8th grade homeroom teacher was Miss Major. I had her too, later. She was real cute. I think she wrote that skit they did. I don't know what happened to her. I think she got married and moved away. They might know at the school. It's John L. Davis School. On Holly Street, near the bridge. Chapter 7. The John L. Davis School was an ancient red brick building with an iron picket fence enclosing the schoolyard. As I went up the steps to the door, I could hear a class of small voices chanting something in unison. It was a sleepy, nostalgic, afternoon sound. In the wide wooden hallway there were drinking fountains which looked absurdly low. A small boy came down the hall, tapping himself gently and wistfully on the head with a ruler. He gave me an opaque stare and continued on his way. There was a nervous young woman in the outer office of the principal's office. She was typing and chewing her lip, and when she looked up at me she was obviously irritated by the interruption. "I'm trying to find a Miss Major who used to teach here. She taught 8th grade subjects, I believe. We only go through the 6th. Then the children go to the junior high." "I know that. But you used to have the 7th and 8th here." "Not for a long time. Not since I've been here." "Aren't there any records? Isn't there any place you could look?" "I wouldn't know where to look. I wouldn't know anything like that." "Are there any teachers here who would have been here when Miss Major was here?" "I guess there probably are." "I guess there would be some." "How long ago was she here?" "About 12 years ago." "Mrs. Stearns has been teaching here 22 years. 3rd grade. Room 16. That's on this floor just around the corner." "I wouldn't want to interrupt a class. Any minute now they'll all be going home. Then you could ask her." "I wouldn't know anything like that. I wouldn't know where to look or anything." I waited outside room 16. There was a lull and then somebody started a record player. Sousa filled the halls with brass, at peak volume. There was a great scurrying in all the rooms. The doors opened. All the small denizens marched into the hall and stood in impatient ragged double lines, stomping their feet in time to the music. The floor shook. Weary teachers kept a cautious eye on the lines. The upstairs rooms marched down the stairs and out the double doors. Then the main floor marched out, yelling as soon as they hit the sunlight. The school was emptied. Sousa blared on for a few moments and died in the middle of a bar. "Mrs. Stearns?" "Yes, I'm Mrs. Stearns." She was a round, pale woman with hair like steel wool and small, sharp, bright dark eyes. "My name is Howard, Talbot Howard. Did you know a Miss Major who used to teach here?" "Of course. I knew Catherine very well. That reminds me, I should stop by and see how she's getting along these days." "She's in town?" "Oh, yes, the poor thing." "Is she ill?" "Oh, I thought you knew. Catherine went blind quite suddenly about 10 years ago. It was a shock to all of us. I feel guilty that I don't call on her more often. But after a full day of the children, I don't feel like calling on anyone. I don't seem to have the energy anymore." "Could you tell me where she lives?" "Not offhand, but it's in the phone book. She's on Finch Avenue, in an apartment. I know the house but I can't remember the number. She lives alone. She's very proud, you know. And she really gets along remarkably well, considering." It was a small ground-floor apartment in the rear of an old house. Music was playing loudly in the apartment. It was a symphony I didn't recognize. The music stopped moments after I knocked at the door. Miss Major opened the door. She wore a blue dress. Her hair was white and worn in a long page boy. Her features were strong. She could have once been a beautiful woman. She was still handsome. When I spoke to her, she seemed to focus on my face. It was hard to believe those eyes were sightless. I told her my name and said I wanted to ask her about a student she had had in the 8th grade. "Please come in, Mr. Howard. Sit there in the red chair. I was having tea. Would you care for some?" "No, thank you." "Then one of these cookies. A friend of mine bakes them. They're very good." She held the plate in precisely the right spot. I took one and thanked her. She put the plate back on the table and sat facing me. She found her teacup and lifted it to her lips. "Now what student was it? Do you remember Timmy Warden?" "Of course I remember him. He was a charmer. I was told how he died. I was dreadfully sorry to hear it. A man came to see me 6 or 7 months ago. He said he'd been in that prison camp with Timmy. I never could quite understand why he came to see me. His name was Fitzmartin and he asked all sorts of odd questions. I couldn't feel at ease with him. He didn't seem quite right, if you know what I mean. When you lose one sense you seem to become more aware of nuances. I was in that camp too, Miss Major." "Oh, I'm so sorry. Probably Mr. Fitzmartin is a friend of yours." No, he's not. That's a relief. Now don't tell me you came here to ask odd questions too, Mr. Howard. Fairly odd, I guess. In camp Timmy spoke about a girl named Cindy. I've been trying to track her down for personal reasons. One of your other students, Cindy Kirshner, told me that you wrote a skit based on Cinderella for the 8th grade when you had Timmy in the class. Timmy wasn't very well when he mentioned this Cindy. I'm wondering if he could have meant the girl who played the part in the play. Whatever has happened to Cindy Kirshner, Mr. Howard? Such a shy, sweet child. And those dreadful teeth. The teeth have been fixed. She's married to a man named Pat Rorick and she has a couple of kids. That's good to hear. The other children used to be horrible to her. They can be little animals at times. Do you remember who played the part of Cindy in the skit? Of course I remember. I remember because it was sort of an experiment. Her name was Antoinette Rossi. Wait a moment. I'll show you something. She went into the other room. She was gone nearly 5 minutes. She came back with a glossy photograph. I had a friend help me sort these out after I learned Braille. I've marked them all so I know this is the right one. It's a graduation picture. I've kept the graduation pictures of all my classes, though what use I have for pictures, I'll never know. She handed it to me and said, I believe Antoinette is in the back row toward the left. Look for a girl with a great mass of black hair and a pretty, rather sullen face. I don't imagine she was smiling. I think I've found her. Antoinette was a problem. She was a little older than the others. Half French and half Italian. She resented discipline. She was a rowdy, a troublemaker. But I liked the child and I thought I understood her. Her people were very poor and I don't think she got much attention at home. She had an older brother who had been in trouble with the police and I believe an older sister. She came to school inadequately dressed when the weather was cold. She had a lot of spirit. She was a very alive person. I think she was sensitive, but she hid it very carefully. I can't help but wonder sometimes what has happened to the child. The Races lived north of the city where the river widens out. I believe that Mr. Rossi had a boat and bait business in the summer and did odd jobs in the wintertime. Their house was a shack. I went out there once after Antoinette had missed a whole week of school. I found she hadn't come because she had a black eye. Her brother gave it to her. I gave her the part of Cinderella in an attempt to get her to take more interest in class activities. I'm afraid it was a mistake. I believe she thought it was a reflection on the way she lived. Was Timmy friendly with her? Quite friendly. I sometimes wondered if that was a good thing. She seemed quite precocious in some departments. And Timmy was a very sweet boy. He could have called her Cindy because of the skit? I imagine so. Children dote on nicknames. I remember one poor little boy with a sinus condition. The other children made him unhappy by calling him Rumblehead. I want to thank you for your help, Miss Major. I hope the information is of some use to you. When you find Antoinette, tell her I asked about her. I'll do that. She went with me to the door. She said, they're bringing me a new Braille student at 4. He seems to be a little late. Mr. Howard, are you in some kind of trouble? The abrupt non sequitur startled me. Trouble? Yes, I'm in trouble. Bad trouble. I won't give you any chin-up lecture, Mr. Howard. I've been given too much of that myself. I was just checking my own reactions. I sensed trouble. An aura of worry. As with that Mr. Fitzmartin, I detected an aura of directed evil. When I got out in front, a woman was helping a young boy out of a car. The boy wore dark glasses. His mouth had an ill-tempered look, and I heard the whine in his voice as he complained about something to her. I felt that I had discovered Cindy. There had been a hint as to what she was like in the very tone of Timmy's voice. Weak as he was, there had been a note of fond appreciation, the echo of lust. Cindy would know. The phrasing was odd. Not Cindy knows. Cindy would know. It would be a place known to her. I sat in my car for a few moments. I did not know how long my period of grace would last. I did not know whether I should continue in search of the elusive Cindy or try to make sense of the relationship between Fitz and Grassman. It came to me that I had been a fool not to search the body. There might have been notes, papers, letters, reports, something to indicate why he had been slain. Yet I knew I could not risk going back there, and it was doubtful that the murderer would have been so clumsy as to leave anything indirectly incriminating on the body itself. I did not know where to start. I didn't think anything could be gained by going to Fitzmartin, facing him. He certainly would answer no questions. Why had it been necessary to kill Grassman? Either it was related to Grassman's job, or it was something apart from it. Grassman's job had apparently been due to Rose Fulton's conviction that her husband had come to some harm here in Hillston. Prine's investigation had evidently been thorough. He was satisfied that Fulton and Deloise Warden had run off together. He had a witness to the actual departure. Yet Grassman had been poking around the cabin the Wardens used to own. I could not imagine what he hoped to gain. I could not help but believe that Grassman's death was in some way related to the $60,000. I wondered if Grassman had somehow acquired the information that a sizable sum had disappeared from the Warden business ventures over a period of time, and had added two and two together. Or if, in looking for Fulton's body, he had stumbled across the money. Maybe at the same time Fitz was looking for it. Many murders have been committed for 1/10 that amount. There was only one starting place with Grassman. That was Rose Fulton. Maybe Grassman had sent her reports. She was probably a resident of Illinois. I wondered who would know her address. It would have to be someone whose suspicions would not be aroused. I wondered if there was any way of finding out without asking anyone. If the police investigation had been reported in the local paper, Fulton's hometown would probably have been given, but not his street address. I realized that I did not dare make any effort to get hold of Mrs. Fulton. It would link me too closely to Grassman. Antoinette Rossi then. I would look for her. The shack was on the riverbank. It had a sagging porch, auto parts stamped into the mud of the yard, dingy Monday washing flapping on a knotted line, a disconsolate tire hanging from a tree limb, and a shiny new television aerial. A thin, dark boy of about 12 was carefully painting an overturned boat, doing a good job of it. A little dark-headed girl was trying to harness a fat, humble dog to a broken cart. A toddler in diapers watched her. Some chickens were scratching the loose dirt under the porch. The children looked at me as I got out of the car. A heavy woman came to the door. She bulged with pregnancy. Her eyes and expression were unfriendly. The small girl began to cry. I heard her brother hiss at her to shut up. The woman in the doorway could have once been quite pretty. She wasn't anymore. It was hard to guess how old she might be. "Is your name Rossi?" I asked. "It was once. Now it's Doyle. What do you want?" "I'm trying to locate Antoinette Rossi." "For God's sake, shut up sniveling, Jeannie. This man isn't come to take the TV." She smiled apologetically at me. "They took it away once, and to Jeannie any stranger comes after the same thing. Every night the kids watch it. No homework, no nothing. Just sit and look. It drives me nuts." "What do you want Antoinette for?" "I've got a message for her. From a friend." The woman sniffed. "She makes a lot of friends, I guess. She doesn't hang around here anymore. She's up in Reading. I don't hear from her anymore. She never gets down. God knows I never get up there. The old man is dead and Jack is in the federal pen in Atlanta, and Doyle can't stand the sight of her, so why should she bother coming down here? Hell, I'm only her only sister. She sends money for the kids, but no messages. No nothing." "What does she do?" She gave me a wise, wet smile. "She goes around making friends, I guess." "How do I get in touch with her?" "Cruise around. Try the Aztec, and the Cub Room. And try the doubloon, too. I heard her mention that. You can probably find her." It was 60 miles to Reading, and dark when I got there. It was twice the size of Hillston. It was a town with a lot of neon. Lime and pink. Dark, inviting blue. Lots of uniforms on the night streets. Lots of girls on the dark streets. Lots of cars going nowhere too fast, horns blowing, Bermuda bells ringing, tires wailing. I asked where the Aztec and the Cub Room and the doubloon were. I was directed to a wide highway on the west edge of town, called, inevitably, the Strip. There the neon really blossomed. There wasn't as much sidewalk traffic. But for a Monday night there were enough cars in the lots. Enough rough music in the air. Enough places to lose your money. Or spend it. Or have it taken away from you. I went to the Aztec and I went to the Cub Room and I went to the doubloon. In each place I asked a bartender about Antoinette Rossi. On each occasion I received a blank stare and a shrug and a, "Never heard of her." "Dark-haired girl? That's unusual. Sorry, Buster." The cadence of the evening was beginning to quicken. All three places were glamorous. They were like the lounges of the hotels along Collins Avenue on Miami Beach, and like the bistros of Beverly Hills. The lighting was carefully contrived. There was a Las Vegas tension in those three places, a smell of money. Here the games were hidden, but not hard to find. The way Mrs. Doyle had spoken of her sister gave me reason to believe I could get assistance from the police. They were in a brand new building. The sergeant looked uncomfortable behind a long curve of stainless steel. I told him what Mrs. Doyle had said about how to find her. There ought to be something on her. Let me check it out. Wait a couple minutes. He got on the phone. He had to wait quite a while. Then he thanked the man on the other end and hung up. He knows her. She's been booked a couple times as Antoinette Rossi, but the name she uses is Tony Razel. She calls herself an entertainer. He says he thinks she did sing for a while at one place. She's a fancy whore. The last address he's got is the Glendon Arms. That's a high-class apartment hotel on the west side, not too far from the Strip. Both times she was booked last it was on a cute variation of the old Badger game. So cute they couldn't make it stick. So watch yourself. She plays with rough people. We got rough ones here by the dozen. I thanked him and left. It was nearly 10 when I got back to the Strip. I went into the Aztec first. I went to the same bartender. Find that girl yet? He asked. I found she calls herself Tony Razel. Hell, I know her. She comes in every once in a while. She may show here yet tonight. You an old friend or something? Not exactly. I tried the other two places. They knew the name there also, but she hadn't been in. I had a steak sandwich in the doubloon. A girl alone at the bar made a determined effort to pick me up. She dug through her purse looking for matches, unlit cigarette in her mouth. She started a conversation a shade too loudly with the bartender and tried to drag me into it. She was a lean brunette with shiny eyes and trembling hands. I ordered a refill for her and moved on to the bar stool next to her. We exchanged inanities until she pointed up at the ceiling with her thumb and said, "Going to try your luck tonight? I'm always lucky. You know there's some fellas I know they wouldn't dare try the crap table without they give me some chips to get in the game. I don't want to gamble. Yeah, sometimes I get tired of it, too. I mean when you just can't seem to get any action out of your money. Do you know a girl around town named Tony Razel?" She stopped smiling. "What about her? You looking for her?" "Somebody mentioned her. I remembered the name. Is she nice?" "She's damn good looking. But she's crazy. Crazy as hell. She doesn't grab me a bit." "How come you think she's crazy, Donna?" "Well, dig this. There's some important guys around here. Like Eddie Larch that owns this place. Guys like Eddie. They really got a yen for her. A deal like that you can fall into. Everything laid on. Apartment, car, clothes. They'd set you up. You know? Then all you got to do is be nice and take it easy. Not Tony. She strictly wants something going on all the time. She wants to lone wolf it. And she keeps getting in jams that way. My Christ, you'd think she liked people or something. If I looked like her, I'd parlay that right into stocks and bonds, believe you me. But that Tony. She does as she damn pleases. She don't like you, you're dead. So you can have $100 bills out to here, you're still dead. She wouldn't spit if your hair was on fire. That's how she's crazy, man. I think I see what you mean." Donna sensed she'd made some sort of tactical error. She smiled broadly and said, "Don't take me serious, that about parlaying it into stocks and bonds. I'm not that type girl. I like a few laughs. I like to get around. My boyfriend is away and I got lonesome tonight so I thought I'd take a look around, see what's going on. You know how it is. Lonesome? Sure you wouldn't want to see if you're lucky?" "I guess not." She pursed her lips and studied her half-empty glass. She tried the next gambit. "You know, at $1 a drink, they must make a hell of a lot out of a bottle. If a person was smart they'd do their drinking at home. It would be a lot cheaper." "It certainly would. You know, if we could get a bottle, I got glasses and ice at my place. We could take our hair down and put our feet up and watch the TV and have a ball. What do you say?" "I don't think so. My boyfriend won't be back in town until next weekend. I got my own place." "No thanks, Donna." "What do you want to do?" "Nothing in particular." "Joey," she called to the bartender. "What kind of place you running?" You got a dead customer sitting here. He's giving me the creepers. She moved over 2 stools and wouldn't look at me. Within 15 minutes 2 heavy, smiling men came in. Soon she was in conversation with them. The 3 of them went upstairs together to try the tables. I hoped her luck was good. After she was gone, the bartender came over and said in a low voice, "The boss gives me the word to keep her out of here. She used to be a lot better looking. Now she gets drunk and nasty. But when he isn't around, I let her stay." What the hell? It's old times, like they say. You know how it is. Sure. She can sure get nasty. And she won't make any time with that pair. Did you dig those country-style threads? A small beer says they don't have $16 between the pair of them. She's losing her touch. Last year this time she'd have cut off their water before they said word one. Old Donna's on the skids. What will she do? He shrugged. I don't know where they go. She can always sign for a tour. He winked. See the world. See all the ports in S.A. I don't know where they go. I wandered back to the Aztec. My bartending friend told me that Tony Razell was out in the casino in back, escorted by a general. He said she was wearing a white blouse and dark red skirt, and had an evening scarf that matched her skirt. I tipped him and went out into the casino. I bought chips through the wicket just inside the door. The large room was crowded. It was brightly, whitely lighted, like an operating amphitheater. The light made the faces of the people look sick. The cards, the chips, the dice, the wheels were all in pitiless illumination. I spotted the uniform across the room. The general was big-chested. He held his face as though he thought he resembled MacArthur. He did a little. But not enough. He had 3 rows of discreetly faded ribbons. Antoinette Rossi stood beside him and laughed up at him. It was the face of the high school picture, matured, not as sullen. Her tumbled hair was like raw blue-black silk. She held her folded rebozo over her arm. Her brown shoulders were bare. She was warm within her skin, moving like molten honey, teeth white in laughter against her tan face. Wide across the cheekbones. Eyes deep set. Nose broad at the bridge. Feral look. Gypsy look. A mature woman so alive she made the others in the room look two-dimensional, as though they had been carefully placed there to provide their drab contrast to Tony's look of greedy life. They were at the roulette table. I stood across the table. The general was solemnly playing the black. When he lost, Tony laughed at him. He didn't particularly like it, but there wasn't much he could do about it. I had $21 chips. I began playing 29, and watching her instead of the wheel. I won $36 on the 4th spin. I began to play the red, and kept winning. Tony became aware of my interest in her. So did the general. He gave me a mental command to throw myself on my sword. Tony gave me a few irritated glances. Finally the general had to go back to the window to buy more chips. They didn't sell them at the table. As soon as he was gone I said, "Antoinette?" She looked at me carefully. "Do I know you?" "No. I want a chance to talk to you." "How do you know my name?" "Antoinette Rossi. Through Timmy Warden. Remember him?" "Of course. I can't talk now. Phone me tomorrow. At noon. 83891. Can you remember that?" 83891. "I'll remember." The general came back, staring at me with bitter suspicion. I went away, taking with me the memory of her dark eyes and her low, hoarse, husky voice. I drove back through the night to Hillston. It was well after midnight when I got there. I wondered if they would be waiting for me at the motel. But the no vacancy sign was lighted and my room was dark. I went to bed and went to sleep at once. An hour later I awakened abruptly from a nightmare. I was drenched with sweat. I had dreamed that Grassman rode my back, his legs clamped around my waist, his heavy arms around my throat. I walked down a busy street with him there, asking, begging for help. But they would scream and cover their eyes and shrink away from me. And I knew that Grassman's face was more horrible than I had remembered. No one would help me. Then it was not Grassman anymore. It was Timmy who rode there. I could smell the earth we had buried him in. I woke up in panic and it took me a long time to quiet down again. Chapter 8. I called her at noon and she answered on the 10th ring just as I was about to give up. Her voice was blurred with sleep. "Who's it?" "Tal Howard." "Who?" "I spoke to you last night at the Aztec. About Timmy Warden. You said to phone." I could hear the soft yowl of her complete yawn. "Oh, sure. You go have some coffee or something and then stop around here. I live at a place called the Glendon Arms. Give me about 40 minutes to wake up." I wasted a half hour over coffee and a newspaper, and then found the Glendon Arms without difficulty. It was as pretentious as its name, with striped canopy, solid glass doors, mosaic tile lobby floor, desk clerk with dreary sneer. He phoned and told me I could go right up to Miss Razel's apartment, 3rd floor, 3A. The elevator was self-service. The hallway was wide. I pushed the button beside her door. She opened the door and smiled as she let me in. She wore a white Angora sleeveless blouse, slacks of corduroy in a green plaid. I had expected her to be puffy, blurred by dissipation, full of a morning surliness. But she looked fresh, golden, shining and clean. The great mop of black hair was pulled sleekly back and fastened into an intricate rosette. "Hi, Tal Howard. Can you stand more coffee? Come along." There was a small breakfast terrace with sliding doors that opened onto it from the bedroom and the kitchen. The sun was warm on the terrace. We had coffee and rolls and butter on a glass-top table. "Last night was a waste," she said. "He was a friend of a friend. A stuffed uniform until drink number 10. And then what? He goes with his hands like so. Zoom. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Gun noises. Fighter planes. I'm too old for toys." He had a lot of ribbons. He told me what they were for. Several times. "How did you track me down, Tal Howard?" "Through your sister." "Dear God. Anita has turned into a real slob. It's that Doyle allows that the sun rises and sets on Doyle. The kids are nice, though. I don't know how they made it, but they are." "What's with Timmy?" "He was my first love." "How is that cutie?" "He's dead, Tony." Her face lost its life. "You certainly didn't waste any time working up to that." "How?" "He was taken prisoner by the Chinese in Korea. So was I. We were in the same hut. He got sick and died there and we buried him there." "What a stinking way for Timmy to go." "He was a nice guy. We got along fine, right up into the second year of high school, and then he started considering his social position and brushed me off. I don't blame him. He was too young to know any better. He left me to take a big hack at the dancing school set. My reputation wasn't exactly solid gold." She grinned. "Nor is it yet." "He mentioned you while we were in camp." "Did he?" "He called you Cindy." For a long moment she looked puzzled, and then her face cleared. "Oh, that. You know, I'd just about forgotten that. It was sort of a gag. In that 8th grade we had a teacher who was all hopped up about class activities. I was the rebel. She stuck me in a play as Cinderella. Timmy was the prince. He called me Cindy for quite a while after that. A year maybe. A pretty good year, too. I was a wild kid. I didn't know what I wanted. I knew that what I had, I didn't want. But I didn't know how to make a change. I was too young." "Gee, I'm sorry about Timmy. That's depressing. It makes me feel old, Tal. I don't like to feel old." "I came back and tried to find a Cindy. I didn't know your right name. I found a couple. Cindy Waskowitz. A great fat pig. But nothing jolly about her. Brother, she was as nasty as they come. She's dead, too. Glandular trouble of some kind. Couldn't you go around wearing a wreath or singing hymns like Crossing the Bar?" "I'm sorry." Then there was Cindy Kirshner. "Kirshner? Wait a minute. A younger kid. Teeth like this?" "That's right. But she had them fixed. Now she has a husband and a couple of kids. Good for her. She was the one who remembered the class play or skit or whatever it was. And the name of the 8th grade teacher. Miss Major. She couldn't remember who played Cinderella. So I found Miss Major. She went blind quite a while ago and—" "For God's sake, Tal. I mean really. I'm sorry. Anyway, she identified you. I went out and saw your sister. I came here hunting for Antoinette Rossi. The way your sister spoke about you, when I couldn't find you, I tried the police. They told me the name you use. Then it was easy." She looked at me coldly and dubiously. "Police, eh? They give you all the bawdy details?" "They told me a few things. Not much. But enough. Enough so that when you walked in here you had to act like a little kid inspecting a leper colony. What the hell did you expect to find?" A room all mirrors? A turnstile? Don't get sore. You look stuffy to me, Tal Howard. Stuffy people bore me. So what the hell was this? A sentimental journey all the way from prison camp to dig up poor little me? Not exactly. And I'm not stuffy. And I don't give a damn what you are or what you do. The glare faded. She shrugged and said, skip it. I don't know why I should all of a sudden get sensitive. I'm living the way I want to live. I guess it's just from talking about Timmy. That was a tender spot. From thinking about the way I was. At 13 I wanted to lick the world with my bare hands. Now I'm 28. Do I look it? No, you really don't. She rested her cheek on her fist. She looked thoughtful. You know, Tal Howard, another reason why I think I jumped on you. I think I'm beginning to get bored. I think I'm due for some kind of a change. Like what? More than a new town. I don't know. Just restless. Skip that. You said this wasn't exactly a sentimental journey. What is it? There's something else involved. Mystery, hey? What's with you? How do you mean? What do you do? You married? I'm not doing anything right now. I'm not married. I came here from the West Coast. I haven't got any permanent address. You're not the type. How do you mean that? That information doesn't fit you, somehow. So it's just a temporary thing with you. You're between lives, aren't you? And maybe as restless as I am? I could be. She winked at me. And I think you've been taking yourself too seriously lately. Have you noticed that? I guess I have. Now what's the mystery? I'm looking for something. Timmy hid something. Before he left. I know what it is. I don't know where it is. Before he died, not very many hours before he died, Timmy said, Cindy would know. That's why I'm here. Here from the West Coast, looking for Cindy. He hid something nice, then. Like some nice money? If you can help me, I'll give you some money. How much? It depends on how much he hid. Maybe you admitted too fast that it was money, Tal. I am noted for my fondness for money. It pleases me. I like the feel of it and the smell of it and the look of it. I'm nuts about it. I like all I can get, maybe because I spent so much time without any of it. A psychiatrist friend told me it was my basic drive. I can't ever have too much. If that was really your basic drive, you wouldn't say it like that, I don't think. It's just the way you like to think you are. She was angry again. Why does every type you meet try to tell you what you really are? It's a popular hobby. So all right. He hid something. Now I've got a big fat disappointment for you. I wouldn't have any idea where he hid something. I don't know what he means. Are you sure? Don't look at me like that. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I do know and I won't tell you because I want it all. Honestly, Tal, I don't know. I can't think what he could have meant. I believed her. This sun is actually getting too hot. Let's go inside, she said. I helped carry the things in. She rinsed the dishes. Having seen her the previous evening, I would not have thought she had the sort of figure to wear slacks successfully. They were beautifully tailored and she looked well in them. We went into the living room. It was slightly over-furnished. The lamps were in bad taste. But it was clean and comfortable. She sat on the couch and pulled one leg up and locked her hands around her knee. Want to hear about Timmy and me? The sad story? Not sad, I guess. If you want to tell it. I've never told anybody. Maybe it's time. I turned 15 before I got out of the 8th grade. I was older than the other kids. Timmy was 14. He was the biggest boy in class. We never had anything to do with each other until that skit. We practiced a couple of times. We got to be friends. It wasn't a girlfriend-boyfriend thing. More like a couple of boys. I wasn't the most feminine creature in the world, believe me. I could run like the wind and I could fight with my fists. Thank you for listening to today's story. I really hoped you enjoyed it as much I did. There will be more to come. Please subscribe not to miss out on what is next. I will be looking forward to your return. The music is by Madfan from Pixabay. To support this and other artists, go to pixabay.com. Sheila.